So NaNoWriMo is almost upon us. And what? NaNoWriMo's cancelled. They closed their doors under immense pressure from their morally puritanical fan base. Well, I don't know about you, but that seems like something worth talking about. Roll the intro. Huh? No, there's no intro. All right, so I'm going to do this video in 4 parts. The first part is going to be a bit of context, a bit of history about NaNoWriMo, where it came from, what it became. The second part is going to be about its downfall, why I think it failed and ultimately collapsed under the weight of itself and its community. The third part is going to be talking about the scandals that it was involved in themselves, what they were and how they handled them and what impact that they had on them. And then the fourth part is just going to be looking to the future. What's next and what will we do in November now? So for context, I put together a short history of NaNoWriMo. It's 9 concise bullet points. I've narrowed it down to that. So we start in July 1999. That's when it was founded by this guy called Chris Beatty. And it was simply just friends getting together, trying to write a novel in a month. And in that month, a few of them managed to hit 50,000 words. In November 2000, the year after, the second one took place, but this time they moved it to November, supposedly to take advantage of the sort of miserable weather, the longer nights, more conducive to writing, that sort of thing. November 2001, the event had grown already to about 5,000 participants, largely via word of mouth, blogs, like very, very early web coverage. November 2003, some of the features that we know today became more formalized. Email pep talks became a thing. The multiple liaison program, or the ML program, was introduced, which was local volunteers that would coordinate regional and local meetups. Because one of the things about NaNoWriMo was that like every big city would have their own little offshoots of it. Then we move on to April 2006, where NaNoWriMo officially registers itself as a non-profit under the name the Office of Letters and Light. Jump ahead now, November 2015, where NaNoWriMo boasted over 400,000 participants in its programs. And this is like registered participants, people signed up, not people who just did it in November anyway, like me, without registering. Then they have a good few years. November 2003, a few accusations are made against a moderator in their Young Writers Program forums. The accusations are very, very serious and related to kind of child endangerment. People were not happy with how they responded to those allegations. October 2024, they released a bizarre statement regarding their position on AI, and this is also largely condemned by the community. And then finally, March 2025, almost 25 years after it began, they officially closed their doors. They released a 30-minute video, which explains their fall and why they folded and what's going to happen in the future. So there we have it. It's an accidental success story with a meteoric rise and a spectacular fall driven largely by the vitriol of their own community. So part 2, I'm calling this the Community Delusion. So from its very inception, NaNoWriMo didn't really host a community. It was a community. Even when it started spending $1.3 million every year to support itself, the people who were its user base, who were on the forums, they never really thought of it as a corporate entity. And on the surface, that's kind of okay, right? It's a kind of participatory myth, a sort of shared dare that anyone can take up. It is a feeling of belonging to and being part of something that is bigger than yourself. And all of these things are good on the surface, but lurking beneath all of that is a very dangerous illusion. The thought process goes something like, NaNoWriMo is a community, and I am part of that community. We are that community, and so we should get a say in how it behaves. And that's what we end up with. We end up with a community that has projected itself onto the brand so much that any deviation from their expectations, whether it's a stance on AI, whether it's changes in software or policy, ends up feeling like a personal betrayal. Now, we don't usually expect brands to align with our personal values. In fact, for bigger brands, it might be kind of the opposite. Like, we might not like Apple's business plan, but we're probably not personally affronted by it. But when product is the community itself, that's when this sense of ownership starts to creep in. It is a rare bird indeed that can stay aloft during the kind of new age puritanism and moral certainty of the last decade or so. And NaNoWriMo weren't no kakapo. What a weird thing to say. That sounded good when I wrote it down. By the late 2010s, the NaNoWriMo forums had become deeply moralized. It had gone from a vibe of like, hey, let's write together to let's create a safe space. And to be fair to them, that's not just them, that's forums in general. I put together here what I consider to be the trajectory of online forums from like the early days to where they are now. And this will give you a bit of an idea of what happened to NaNoWriMo as well. So for me, you think about early internet forums, they're a place that sort of prioritize inclusivity and also self-regulation. So it's kind of like, oh, anyone who's into this weird niche thing that we're into, like you can come over here, you can enjoy this thing, we can talk about this thing. It doesn't really matter who you are, how old you are, just don't be a dick, right? That's kind of how we start. But then what happens is you have a few bad incidents, harassment, trolls, people crossing the line, going a bit further, saying things that they shouldn't say. And so that leads to calls for stricter moderation or moderation in general. Then moderation introduces what I would call like norm enforcement. So we go from, hey, we don't do that here to if you do that, we'll kick you out, right? So that's the next things that happen. Now that norm enforcement becomes this kind of ideological policing. So once the rules are in place, we have rules, we have moderators, people start arguing about what those rules mean and about whose values they should reflect, right? So one user from one perspective gets banned for offensive language, but from another, it's like, oh, it's censorship that's happening. We start to have these sorts of conversations in every forum, and it doesn't really matter what the forum is about anymore. Finally, this vague ideal of this safe space that we're trying to create, it actually becomes a hotbed of moral absolutism, right? And the purity of the space is maintained by expulsion, right? That's kind of how they work. I was reading, by the way, a post on christianwriters.com about NaNoWriMo, and this kind of illustrates my point. This was a woman on this forum talking about her experience when she was a young teenager. So she says that she was on the Young Writers program of Nano back when she was about 15. And she said she cites an example where there are moderators that are calling out and restricting, she calls Christian and conservative users and their views. So they were claiming the site was neutral and unbiased. However, she said that's obviously not the case when you allow BLM in your logo, but you're not allowed to state that you're anti-abortion, for example. So whatever you think of any of these things, the point is that these are the kinds of conversations that are happening on a forum that should just really be about writing and hitting that 50,000 words. And if you're a reasonable sort of person, you might ask, what are the staff supposed to do in this kind of situation? And don't forget, there's a lot of volunteers involved here. So they're kind of in a situation where they've grown massively and they've got a lot of pressure on them, and maybe they're not really equipped and they don't really know what they should be doing. Now, a lot of criticism has been leveled at the NaNoWriMo staff. I don't know if that was justified or not, but what is definitely true is they were never really equipped to deal with this kind of public-facing moral labor. There were a handful of overworked nonprofit employees trying to moderate tens of thousands of emotionally invested users, a mix of children, aspiring authors, self-proclaimed activists, and sanctimonious keyboard warriors, and they were getting it from every single angle. From the nostalgia sucklers, you ruined the thing I love. From the posturing activists, you refused to take a stand. From the moral Puritans, you failed to protect us. And from the cynics, you wasted our money. And every time, for every single person, it felt like a personal betrayal. But I think there's also another big reason why the community turned on them, and it has to do with the exceptional success. You see, when NaNoWriMo started seeking grants and ad money, they were transitioning from a scrappy communal startup into a corporate nonprofit. In fact, in their farewell video, and when they explain kind of why everything went down, they say that between 2018 onward, less than 40% of their income actually came from its users and donations. And so it is at this point and in this transition where this sense of shared ownership, it starts to crumble. You see, the community's love was never freely given. It depended on NaNoWriMo as an organization remaining small, pure, and ultimately poor. The moment it started acting like an organization, the anti-capitalist bells of many of its users started ringing, and that love was replaced quickly and viciously with contempt. All right, so part 3 is the scandals themselves. Let's talk about them. There's one really big major one, and there's one kind of nail in the coffin. So let's look at the first one. First major claim is that they created an opportunity for child endangerment, and when it was brought to light, they failed to act properly in order to combat it. I'm gonna read a lot of this off because I don't want to get the facts wrong. So Here are the facts as I know them. So in November 2003, a group of forum users presented evidence to NaNoWriMo of alleged illegal activity of one of its moderators. They claim that this moderator was directing minors, specifically from their young writers programs. This is people, I believe, that are younger than 18. And they were directing them to an adult diaper fetish website, either by posting links in the forum or by encouraging young people to investigate and maybe being a bit vaguer about their language. The criticism is that it took NaNoWriMo several weeks to respond, and when they did, the response was not very forthright. They acknowledged receiving numerous complaints, but they stated that not all of them, including those, the most serious ones that alleged child grooming, had they been able to verify. The forums were eventually taken down for further investigation, and every communication that they made, they were careful to distinguish between complaints and verified claims, suggesting that much of what they were told they couldn't substantiate. The moderator in question was ultimately removed from their position for what NaNoWriMo described as an unrelated code of conduct violation, which is odd. But then this person was allowed to remain a user on the site still, which people were also angry about. Now look, from an outsider's perspective, there are two ways you can look at this. On the one hand, you have a group of kind of online vigilantes presenting what they described as concrete evidence and proof of wrongdoing. And on the other hand, you have a small team and its board claiming that they're having a really difficult time distinguishing what's real and what isn't. Now, as an observer, it's difficult because none of this evidence we are able to see. So when I was doing research for this video, I was looking like, okay, what were the forum posts? Who was it? You know, where were their links? Like, what were they sent? But none of that information is available to us online. So as an outside observer looking in, we can look at this in one of two ways. We can say the strongest take would be, no, we trust these users absolutely. We've got no reason to distrust them. The evidence was almost certainly substantial and overwhelming. NaNoWriMo failed to act. They failed in their moral and legal duty, and they were rightly condemned for it, right? So that's one stance that you could take. I would argue that a more balanced take would be, well, it seems like the evidence was a bit murky. The team probably lacked the investigative capability and even the legal clarity in order to act properly. The outrage quickly outpaced the facts, and they were essentially overwhelmed by a crisis that grew beyond their structure and their capacity to deal with it. You'd be forgiven for thinking with the excess of the outrage that they didn't act at all. I think a lot of the criticism is they acted too slowly or maybe not strongly enough, but they did do a bunch of stuff. So I've got it here. I wrote it down, right? So this is what they did in order to win back trust. So they got new management in. One of the board members, who, by the way, the board claimed that they found out about the thing much later. The staff didn't tell them and pass on that information. And when they did tell them, that's when they decided to close down the forum. So they hire a board member as a new manager, and they launch a series of reforms. So they end their policy of all ages spaces, which is previously it was like anyone, any age, they could all interact together. They forced a site-wide reset that requires users to enter their date of births before signing up. They created a separate interface for users 11 to 17 with added safety features. They required educators to verify their credentials. This wasn't the case before. Became more transparent about spaces that were under their banner but that they had no control over. And they paused programs where they couldn't find adequate moderation solutions. But here's what they failed to understand is that ultimately nothing that they did would ever have been good enough. We don't take apologies well in 2025, and by the time that NaNoWriMo acted, these criticisms had already crystallized into a symbol of moral failure and corporate rot. We moved from, hey guys, this is happening, to you endangered minors. And then once that happens, nothing short of self-immolation will do. In my opinion, the NaNoWriMo community wanted two incompatible things, and I've written them down as I've been thinking about this. They wanted a safe space for young writers that was perfectly aligned with their identity marking values, but they also wanted an open, egalitarian community with minimal corporate control. In my mind, these two things, they don't mesh. They can't exist together. So in the end, of course, they got neither. The second scandal was that their stance on AI was antithetical to their ethos, a slap in the face to writers, and borderline offensive to anyone that disagreed with them. Okay, so what was this second scandal. So in October 2024, this is about a year removed, well, almost exactly a year removed from their last scandal, at a time where they really didn't need this, they released a statement that was entitled, "What is NaNoWriMo's official position on artificial intelligence, AI?" The statement honestly was bizarre. It was poorly worded. It failed to read the room, and it thrust them into the very heart of a very toxic debate that they obviously wanted nothing to do with. Now, you might ask, why did they bother saying anything at all? But that's before you remember the types of people who make up this so-called community, for whom saying nothing and doing nothing is also complicity. So by this point, the organization, who they knew they were on a downward trajectory, they're terrified of pissing anyone at all off, they try and thread what is honestly an impossible needle. They try and remain neutral whilst preemptively defending themselves from the anti-AI mob by suggesting that anyone who disagreed with them might themselves be discriminatory. I think everyone probably agrees that this is an absurd position, and they were ripped to shreds for it. To be honest, a later statement that they made, which would aim to sort of quell the flames of this outrage, it does a better job of explaining their position. They say that taking a position of neutrality was not an abandonment of writers' legitimate concerns about AI. It was an acknowledgement that NaNoWriMo can't maintain a civil, inclusive community if we allow selective intolerance. We absolutely believe that AI must be discussed and that its ethical use must be advocated for. What we don't believe is that NaNoWriMo belongs at the forefront of that conversation. The debate should continue to thrive within the great writing community as technologies continue to evolve. In other words, have your debate. We want no part of it, and we don't want to take one side or the other, because we're just terrified of losing more members of our community, and we need you desperately to survive. But of course, just like the previous scandal, it wasn't enough. It's never enough. And they made another fatal mistake here, because they started themselves to play the moral game. They're using phrases like ableism and classism when they should be saying, "Hey guys, who's ready to smash their 50K this year?" And this is just a terrible game to play. You see, when you give the moral Puritans the time of day, when you try and use their language and their thought processes against them, you lose, because it's not really about the virtue. It's about the feeling of power and superiority that the moral high ground gives you. In their farewell video, NaNoWriMo say that this AI stuff had nothing to do with their closing, and that might be true, but it definitely didn't help, because it came at a time where they just are trying desperately to win back the goodwill of their community, and they're just failing again and again and again. If there was the spark, if there was an ember of the goodwill left, like a tiny ember in a burnt-out, ash-ridden campfire, then this AI controversy was the bucket of ice water that completely washed it away. The pattern repeats. They act, they explain, the mob devours them again and again and again until there's nothing left. Now, I've attempted NaNoWriMo a bunch of times, and I've never won, which is to say I've never hit the 50K words. And even in the years where I didn't participate, I thought about it. Am I going to do it this year? What would I do? What would I write about? It's like never far from my mind. One year, I participated in Camp NaNoWriMo, which is the summer version. And the reason I did is because I had a group of online friends, and we decided to do it together. And it was pretty cool. And they put you in this little room, and you could see each other's word counts go up and everything. And that was the first time I really felt this sense of community. I'd never felt that before, and it was really good fun. In general, I never really understood what they could offer me. I wasn't really into the forums. I'm not really into kind of meeting strangers and chatting to them online, and so it was always just more of an ideal for me. Other than a progress bar, some cheesy affirmations, a virtual reward that I've got no use for. I never really understood what they could do for me. And the thing is, I wasn't alone in that confusion. Even the people that lived in those forums, that joined the write-ins, that were really a part of what they were doing every year, they didn't really understand what it cost and the value of keeping this thing running. In their final statement, NaNoWriMo say that one of the biggest reasons for the demise was this, and this is a quote from them. They say that too many members of a very large and very engaged community let themselves believe that the service we provided was free. That's a pretty sobering admission because, like, of course it wasn't free. It wasn't free to host. It wasn't free to moderate. It wasn't free to maintain. But of course, it felt free. It never felt like a company. It felt like a tool, something to strive for, something to take part in, a tradition, a feat to accomplish. When someone says, I'm doing NaNoWriMo this year, they're not actually talking about the company at all most of the time. They're just saying, I'm going to try and write 50,000 words in a month. And while that may well have been their downfall, although I think I've explained that there were other big factors at play, I actually think that that will also be their legacy. With or without the organization, for many, NaNoWriMo will remain National Novel Writing Month, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. And so, in honor of NaNoWriMo's spectacular demise, I'm going to do NaNoWriMo this year, I've decided, and I'm going to aim for my first win. And what's more, I'm going to live stream it every day on this channel to keep myself accountable. And I would love it if you join me in this journey. So if you are interested in that, if you're in, if you want to do it, if you're looking for a place and a new community to do it together, let's bloody do it. Subscribe to this channel. There'll be a link down below. If you want to, like, know some dates and live stream dates and things like that, and some of the more detail-y sort of stuff, then you can subscribe to my email list and I'll make sure to send you those out. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. And yeah, let me know, what are your thoughts about NaNoWriMo? Have you done it? Will you do it? Was it ever really a company for you, or was it more an idea and a thing? Let me know in the comments. We'll get into it, and I will see you